Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this live stream, enabling enterprises to innovate and operate at startup speeds. So my name is David Brown. I head up the Hybrid Cloud Services business unit at HPEAPAC Enterprise for Australia and New Zealand. So I think it's safe to say that we've all experienced the success of many startups over the last few years. If you think of Uber, Airbnb, Instagram, Spotify, just to name a few, we've seen them scale globally at speed. And we've also, from a technical perspective, seen that at ease as well. So they learn from every interaction and they use this to continuously improve their products and services, even launch new ones. So this has forced the enterprise to respond. They're looking at reinventing their business models, they're looking at restructuring their organization, and they're also looking to embed disruptive technology within their business. Right, containers is one of many disruptive technologies that the startups are using and the enterprises are also looking to use to adopt and make that shift towards more of a faster innovation and drive those operational efficiencies. So this live stream is aimed at focusing on just the business benefits of containers, such as cost savings, agility, innovation, through the discussions from industry thought leaders who've got first-hand experience working with the enterprise. I'm super excited to hear what everyone's got to say on the panel. So let me introduce our guest speaker, Des Blanchfield, to get things going. So Des, he's a veteran when it comes to the world of disruptive technology. He's a strategic leader in business and digital transformation, and he's also founder and CEO of Social, which is a fast-growing startup in itself, delivering targeted outcomes through digital and social. So Des, thanks so much for hosting this live stream. Pass it over to you.
David, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to be here with you. Folks, thanks for tuning in. It's great to have you here today. We appreciate you making time to join us for this great conversation. So today's format is going to be in a couple of pieces. A great introduction today just now by David Brown, thank you. I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists in a moment, and then we're going to have a mini keynote styled briefing by Michael Draper on the whole topic of digital transformation, and then follow that with a fireside chat with our panelists, and then a Q&A at the end. And you can participate in real time, popping the questions into the chat window, of course, and as they come through, we'll do our best to answer them. So before we kick off with Michael Draper's briefing on digital transformation, let me welcome and introduce our guests. We're joined today by some illustrious gurus of all business and technology challenges. Celine Slough, who's the head of sales for Asia Pacific at HPE Software Esmeralda Group. Celine, great to have you here. Thanks for taking time out of your day to join us.
Very nice to meet everyone. Very happy to be here. Thank you, Des.
We're also joined by David Curry. Now, David is the head of solution engineering at VMware Tanzu. David, thanks again for making time to join us.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks to everyone. Really looking forward to this.
We're also joined by Michael Draper. Now, Michael's director of HPE Technical Cloud Solutions. Michael, great to have you here.
Great. Thanks for the invite.
So folks, as I mentioned, our outline is going to be a briefing now by Michael in a moment around the whole topic of digital transformation and I guess the state of the nation and where things are at with that, both from a business perspective and a technical perspective. And then we're going to pivot to a fireside chat style panel with our panelists. So with that in mind, before we do dive into the conversation, I wonder, Michael, if I could throw to you to talk about, I guess, give us an overview from 30,000 foot point of view of the latest trends and what you're seeing around the broad topic of digital transformation.
Well, absolutely, and thank you, Des, and thank you, David, for the warm welcome and the opportunity to talk about one of my favorite topics, digital transformation topics, is how can you help your organization innovate and operate faster at reduced costs? Now, if we thought that was an important topic in 2019, I think 2020 hindsight will most likely show that innovation and agility will be key characteristics that organizations are going to need to master in order to survive in a post-pandemic world. So by the end of the session, you should have a better understanding of the outcomes and challenges associated with digital transformation that can be used to help position your containerization project for success. All right, so a little bit of context here, a little bit of background about me and what we're going to talk about. I've had the good fortune of working in the tech industry for over 35 years. You know, I've worked in positions in IT, I've worked for product companies, I've worked for professional service companies, I work for both startup and global enterprises. For most of my career, I've been focused on optimizing and transforming systems, organization, and business processes. Really, I just like to go fast, you know, whether it's in work or in play, nothing like moving fast. I've seen tremendous amount of successes, and I've seen, you know, a fair number of projects that have fallen short of their expected outcomes. So it really isn't rocket science. You do things a couple hundred times, you see success patterns and failure patterns. So part of this talk today and part of this briefing is to share with you those success patterns and failure patterns, so hopefully you can take some key points and better position your projects. So before anyone asks the question, can the enterprise transform and innovate and operate at startup speeds? Let me answer it. You know, the answer is unequivocally yes. I've seen it done. I've seen it done numerous times. Now, with that in mind, it's a lot harder for the enterprise to accelerate to startup speeds. It's kind of like a super tanker. It takes a while to get it turned and headed in the right direction due to their legacy business processes, number of stakeholders, governance models, etc. Right? Enterprises are much bigger than startup organizations, so you have to plan for it. However, given the commitment, it's definitely doable. And then once they achieve startup speed, you better get out of the way because they're a force to be reckoned with. All right? So let's take a look at some past experiences and examples on how they've done that before we jump into and discuss the present and the future. You know, when you think about business transformation, I think the last time most enterprises went through a major transformation was when they attempted to implement ERP systems, particularly if they're associated with supply chain management. I mean, ERP systems have their own reputation, but let me pause here and ask my colleague Des, just from the standpoint, put him on the spot, top of mind, Des, what's your perception of ERP projects? Any particular attributes or comments you want to pass along? What do you think of?
Well, I believe it's an extremely apt question to ask at this point in time, because I think we can all agree that enterprise resource planning platforms transform businesses. And when we think about digital transformation, that is in effect what we're aiming for at the end of the day. By transforming our technology platforms, we want to transform the business. So that invariably, in my mind, is less so much about the technology stack and more about the people, process, and everything from the HR office all the way down to the human beings from the front door to the warehouse. I think we're seeing a significant refocus on where ERP sits in the organization and where they're being deployed. And I think this is more than ever now in 2020, one of the sort of top 3 to 5 things that people are thinking about, because we're changing the way we work, we're changing where we work, we're changing how we work with our partners, integrators, and supply chains. And we're also changing the way we work with our customers. So I think this is an extremely apt topic for us to bring in at the stage, and I'm glad you mentioned it for all of those reasons and more. And I think we're going to be getting into that in more detail in the Q&A, or sorry, the panel discussion later.
Great point, Des. Thanks so much. Excellent point. As we know, ERP systems can improve the accuracy and timeliness of key revenue-generating business processes. They're doing what people want to do today. They want to shrink time. They want to reduce time to value. They rely on expert systems and typically contain, a single source of truth. However, with that said, ERP implementations are tough, gnarly, multi-year projects, right? They stand the institution on their head. Now, some companies have been wildly successful with ERP implementations, while for others, I think CIO means career is over, right? They've been over budget, overspent, overpromised. They just did not deliver. And some of the learnings here is that, as Des pointed out, ERP projects are not just IT projects. Yes, they have some cool technologies, but the technology alone doesn't deliver the business value. ERP projects are all about transformation. They're all about eliminating waste. They're all about redefining and optimizing value streams, reskilling and repositioning your resources, right? So if you think about successful ERP projects, roles, responsibility, organizational structures, vendor management processes, tools, legal documents, compliance requirements, risk profiles, security practices, learning and development needs, recruitment, You can come up with a big list. It goes on and on. They're all impacted. But some of these probably sound familiar if you've been involved with a cloud adoption project or a DevOps project or a scaled agile, right? Leave any one of them out and you're going to hit a speed bump and come to a hard stop, right? So, the learning here is, it takes a village to transform. And so when you're working with your colleagues and you sign up for a digital transformation project, keep that in mind. So the key here is that the deployment of disruptive technologies alone will not drive transformation. The degree of business value achieved from your digital transformation project will be directly proportional to the degree of which you've optimized your business processes, upskilled your staff, and tuned your organization. At the end of the day, it's the people that are going to deliver the value, obviously with the help of cool technology. So let's keep that in mind. Let's fast forward to the present. Now, last year in speaking to my clients, I love the term luxury of time. I think that has gone by the wayside. All right, last year, most of my clients had the luxury of time to strategize and plan their digital transformation projects. And most of those projects were measured in terms of months and years. All right. Unfortunately, this year we were visited by a black swan event, a global pandemic. So what has changed? I'm going to digress here for a little bit. Any boxing fans in the audience? Any Mike Tyson fans? For those of you who don't know Mike Tyson is a former, world heavyweight boxing champion. He was a star of the Hangover movies. He's a philosopher. He's a convicted felon. He's a Broadway actor, and he's a strategist. Now, last month, just about this time, Mike Tyson announced his return to the ring after retiring for 15 years. So if you're a boxing fan, you probably want to see that fight, right? And that was about the same time someone asked me, said, hey, Mike Draper, how has the pandemic impacted digital transformation programs? I said, that made me think of Mike Tyson. The question made me think about the Mike Tyson quote when reporters would ask him before a fight. They would say, hey, Tyson, your opponent's going to move laterally or do this or do that. What's going to happen? And often his reply would be, you know what? Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. All right. So yes, a lot of companies were stunned by the pandemic and had to retreat, pause all projects while they regrouped and reprioritized their investments. Some were down for a count of 9. Unfortunately, some were down for a count of 10. But however, once recovered from the initial shock, several business sectors have rapidly deployed digital transformation initiatives that have redefined the customer experience and value streams. Everyone knows about the redistribution of workforce to remote locations. We've all done that, right, in a very short period of time. Healthcare providers, look at the impact on healthcare providers in a very short period of time, rolling out telehealth. Insurers, all right, insurers have gone to self-service claims assessments, right? Retailers and even, the markets, contactless payments, shopping, and delivery. All right, those are just examples, right? Those are just examples, and all of those required more than just embracing new technology to redefine a digital world. They required cross-functional teams who had the ability to redefine value streams and customer experience, all while reducing costs. Now, what else has changed? The global pandemic has also raised table stakes. Out of necessity, digital transformation programs now need to be deployed in days and weeks, not months and years. So just when you think it can't get any faster or any hectic, it's getting a lot faster and a lot hectic. So, with that in mind, what I'd like to do show is just a mashup. When we think of when we think of containerization is a disruptive technology that can be used to transform your organization and deliver business value. However, the journey is not without challenges. Understanding transformation outcomes and challenges will better help you position your containerization project for success. So let's take a minute and view a mashup of a variety of topics that I've gleaned from talking to both colleagues and clients. So when you think of digital transformation, this is what we're hearing from the marketplace. Obviously, you can see them. Business resiliency is becoming more and more important. We don't know what the next black swan event is going to be, However, we need to be able to be prepared to address it. Operational efficiencies, autonomous operations, agility, time to market, competitiveness, business continuity, data sovereignty, reduced cost, talent acquisition and retention. It's really interesting in speaking to, in different areas of the globe where talent is tough to acquire. And so a lot of CIOs feel the need to have, a high priority digital transformation project on the books to help them both retain, right, and attract key talent, which are then going to help them differentiate, right, differentiate their, their business. So here are all the digital transformation outcomes. You should think about it when you're positioning your containerization program. What are the digital transformation outcomes that your stakeholders are looking for? Similarly, I'm sure you probably heard the expression, no project has survived its first impact with implementation, right? There's all sorts of challenges. Some challenges you can predict, ahead of time. Some challenges just come up and hit you in the face. As you've heard the saying, you never see the bullet that gets you. So, and from the standpoint of project planning, and particularly with digital transformation projects, you want to make sure that you understand who the stakeholders are and what some of the challenges that you can expect. So the next mashup is going to show you a list of digital transformation challenges, right? That list of digital transformation challenges that you can see that you will typically run into, right? In rolling out, whether it's a cloud adoption program, whether it's a DevOps program, whether it's microservice architecture, whether it's a containerization program. Here are all the challenges, right? Resource constraints, well, that's top of mind. Budget constraints, legacy processes, data gravity, right? Culture is a huge one. Operating models, right? The list goes on and on and on. So it's interesting. We looked at the outcomes and challenges. These are exactly the same types of outcomes and challenges that you'd see in a major ERP implementation. So again, if you want to know what's ahead of you, go out and Google the top 5 ERP implementation mistakes, right? Download any of the articles, open it up, do a global search and replace ERP with containerization. Those are some items to think about. All right? So I hope you found that helpful. So let's continue. So really, if we think about containers, right? If you think about containers and the rise of Kubernetes is probably one of the most talked about, most impactful IT technologies today. Containers can transform the organization, they can improve agility, and they can drive innovation. And to dig deeper into these topics, we're really fortunate to have Des Blanchfield here with us today to moderate a fireside chat on the topic of outcomes and challenges associated with deploying Kubernetes. Thanks for your time. Over to you, Des.
Mike, that was fantastic. Thanks so much. I had this visual image of your Mike Tyson quotes and whatnot that digital transformation had transformed into a blood sport, which probably reminds me of a number of projects I would have involved in that nearly did come to blows. But I think what you've done there is set us up for a great conversation now around some of the biggest challenges, because I think when we think about what digital transformation actually means pre-global pandemic, it was already a heady challenge. When we throw in a global pandemic on a global scale, it brings in a whole range of new challenges. And as you said, we've now not just been digitally disrupted, but we've also had to deal with human resource challenges, travel lockdown, supply chain disruption, economic disruption, the whole range. I mean, I don't think there's any part of our lives and our society and ecosystems that hasn't been disrupted. And underpinning all of that has been technology. In many ways, technology has saved us, because we're all able to do things like this now because we can't do physical events. So just to recap, so today's conversation we're going to have, it's all around the topic of enabling enterprises to innovate and operate at startup speeds. So what does it actually mean? We're going to have a conversation around what that actual topic means and where the likes of the new technology platforms that containerization and technologies like Docker and Kubernetes bring about. we're also going to be focusing on the business aspects. So how do I gain value from this as a C-suite decision maker? Or how do I leverage this for a business benefit if I'm a head of a business unit or part of a team lead having to implement a new solution? Or even if I'm a project director or program manager having to roll out either an upgrade or a deployment or a patch or fix, a wide range of things we're going to cover today. So again, just to remind you who's on board today with us, we have Celine Slough, who's Head of Sales, Asia Pacific for HPE Software, Esmeralda Group. We have David Kari, Head of Solutions Engineering, VMware Tanzu, and of course, Michael Draper, you just heard from, who's Director of HPE Technical Cloud Solutions. And we have David Brown in the background as well. So let's talk about cost savings first. I think one of the biggest things we're being challenged with this year in 2020 more than ever, and as I said, it has always been a challenge, but more so ever than now for a number of obvious reasons, hopefully. Cost savings. Where do we gain, so reduce time to market, and reduce cost in implementing solutions? Where do we look for all these big gains from a business point of view? When we think about the life cycle of an application, so software development life cycle, release management, IT service management and support. One of the things I'd like to put to my first question, my guest Celine, for example, is how does using containers make organizations more efficient? Celine, I wonder if you could give us your take on that.
Yeah, thanks, Des. I think before we go into cost savings, it's important to understand why organizations are looking to do that. And I think that's been explained to length by Michael Draper and even yourself, Des. But I also think that when it comes to cost savings, are they really looking to innovate, and in what area? In fact, based on all the conversations I've had over the last couple of months, since the Black Swan event, I've been hearing exactly the opposite, with some of our customers here in Asia Pacific looking to spend and in the right area. And this is in the digitization area. So these efforts have always been in their radar. It's not like they were never looking to digitize, right? But it has been accelerated, and innovation is required because it has to happen right now. Operational efficiency has now become fundamental, right? It is no longer a luxury to have. And customers want to automate, their customer segmentation insights better. Their applications today have to keep up to the demands. It has to be real time. Heck, it even has to be before they even want to see it happen, right? And they want to move to cloud to reduce the CapEx spent. So we also see customers starting to look at how to manage a hybrid cloud environment and looking at the strategies to lift and shift. Is it refactoring? Is it containerization? It is important to understand container definitely supports these initiatives, but there's really no one size fit all. And to bring it back a little bit to the business context, we're seeing a lot of the half-life of organizations that have been discussed quite a fair bit in today's world. An example would be Blockbuster. They could have become the next Netflix, but because of their failure to innovate, you don't see them around anymore, right? And most organizations are very unlikely to survive as long as they would have liked to especially in this current situation. And so to bring it back to a little bit about the learning organization that has long been around by Harvard Business Review in 1993, it's about what the organization has to be constantly learning, and it's about meaning, defining the definition of why it even exists, management and measurement. And I definitely think that containerization and various technologies, amazing technologies out there, will help to ignite that cost savings and pivot their organizations to innovate in the right way.
I love that, and I love the fact that you've mentioned Blockbuster. I read the other day they had a sleep-in. The last Blockbuster store is finally closing down, and they did an Airbnb style thing where you could book yourself a sleep out in the last store before they close the doors and then continue and shut down the entire thing. And I lament the fact that I couldn't travel and do that. That would have been a great experience. David Curry, I wonder if I could bring you in here. I think one of the things that comes up regularly, particularly from boardroom just conversations I'm having, is understanding the balance between the business benefits and the technology benefits. So I wonder if you could maybe briefly outline how that blend works, particularly from the context of cost savings and reduced time to market, implementing things quicker using the likes of containerized technology platforms.
Yeah, just as Michael set up earlier, technology in of itself is not the only thing that's going to solve for cost savings. So it's important to understand that containers in of themselves are not going to just solve for cost savings. There are a bunch of factors, but one of the things that containers do provide you from a characteristics perspective is, I guess, some of the things that you get from it are, you know, the speed of being able to get applications to market faster with environments that you can spin up really, really quickly. It is one of the advantages that containerization provides and container platforms provides. By doing that, you can have more innovation. It allows for greater innovation, which hopefully ultimately leads to greater competitive advantage, which is the business outcome you're trying to drive, is trying to get more out to your market. The fact that containers are also lightweight, not requiring as many resources as traditional ways of deploying applications, also provides you with the ability to, you know, operationally be efficient in the way that you deliver these applications, run and manage those applications. So that's a pretty important factor from a competitive advantage perspective as well. And the other thing that you get is the ability to move applications fairly easily. Portability is something that you can move to different deployment approaches or different deployment options that you've got. And so having that choice is something that as an organization, as an enterprise, or commercial enterprise, you would want to be able to have that to sort of leverage the various options that you've got available to your organization.
Yeah, great points. And in fact, you reminded me of something that came up the other day on a whiteboard session in a virtual sense, unfortunately, and that was that when we started looking at how an organization I'm working with were going to pivot from physical to virtual, virtual to cloud, and then virtual to sort of, you know, containers and microservices, we ended up rewriting the phrase ROI from return on investment to return on operational, reduced operational implementation. And we knew that if we could reduce the time to get a operational implementation in place, we were going to invariably reduce costs by default, right? And I think you've highlighted that very, very clearly there. Celine, I wonder if I can come back to you. You know, organizations are more some organizations are more successful than others adopting technologies like Kubernetes. I wonder if you could give us your thoughts on what makes Kubernetes difficult or challenging to deploy, particularly with the conversations you're having with your clients and partners and integrators. And do you see any reoccurring success patterns or failure patterns with regard to Kubernetes adoption that you could potentially give us some insights to?
So I'm seeing Kubernetes actually slowly taking up in all of Asia Pacific. We're seeing customers that are not putting them in the production environment yet, but we're also seeing customers that are you know, full on, you know, adopting Kubernetes. But I think taking a step back, Kubernetes is an open source framework to run, you know, a distributed system resiliency. That's what it's expected to do. It takes care of scaling and failover for applications and deployment patterns. And with any adoption of technology, Kubernetes or not, open source or not, it is important to definitely still have the IT organization, enterprise architecture, and applications team look into proper swim lanes, and management and orchestration is absolutely required. For example, if you're on full-blown Kubernetes deployment, or if you're even starting to do that live in a production environment, it's important to understand version controls, because you can just imagine the sheer amount of management and housekeeping required to bring everything back to its framework once it's been fully deployed in multiple divisions and multiple versions. And containers will help with the orchestration and management of this. And I've seen customers that are able to round it back and yet, you know, empower various different Kubernetes deployment just based on containerization as well.
David, Carrie, I know you've definitely get your finger in the pulse in this whole space, from the physical infrastructure to the virtualization hypervisors, all the way through to, you know, I guess, you know, API economies. I'd love to get your take on this and any particular recurring patterns, whether they be success or failure, and any insights you've seen from particularly some of your large implementations I know that you're well known for. I'd be keen to get your insights on that and any other ancillary elements we should be considering when we think about deploying the likes of containerized platforms into Kubernetes.
Yeah, I'm stealing a quote from Kelsey Hightower, the developer advocate at Google, who's pretty prominent in the Kubernetes sort of space. And he states, it's Kate's Kubernetes. Kate's is short for Kubernetes, but Kate's is a good start, but it's not the end game. Okay, and what does he mean by it not being the end game? I guess when you think about what you require from an application team or a development team perspective, or, you know, deploying applications and running applications on a platform, you need to think about operationalizing the whole platform. You need to think about the skill sets that you've got. You need to think about the stakeholder engagement that you have. You need to think about development frameworks that you provide and development languages that you provide for. What about monitoring and logging and observability, application performance monitoring? So there's all of these aspects that you need to think of. And while Kubernetes provides some of those things, it doesn't provide them all. And you need to integrate various tools and ways and processes for that, you know, going back to what Michael was saying earlier. So organizations that we've worked with and ones that have been super successful, and most of them have been, they've ensured that they've got the right skill sets. They've ensured that the people that they've got have really thought through how they actually implement, operationalize, evangelize, talk about the platforms that they've got. They're constantly seeking feedback from the teams that they're working with to implement and provide different tools, different processes to improve the onboarding, the lifecycle management of applications. They've also got a really well-defined way of managing their deployment, which is operationalizing it, because you don't want to have the operational overhead of having this platforming. They also allow development teams to utilize whichever development languages and frameworks that they want to use. Because if you look at technology and the span of what's happening with languages and frameworks, they change constantly. So allowing for that is really important. And they also provide ways in which teams can monitor the platform from infrastructure all the way up to the application space and everywhere in between, and provide metrics and dashboards to various people that are concerned with those things. They're the key things that are happening.
Celine, I wonder if you could expand on that one-size-fits-all point you made earlier on, because that really struck a chord with me.
Yeah, so to add on to David, right, I agree, you know, with what he talked about, management, operational, you know, monitoring, and I think from the sense of one size fit all, we're talking about innovation and change here, right? And in order for change and progress to happen within an organization, structure and talent is very important, because David was actually talking about that earlier. And early adopters of engaging and selecting the right talent with proper structure and roadmap actually shows a lot more resiliency. I can't speak to the organization too much. I can name names, but I've seen them become very, very successful as a result of being able to identify talent and be able to coach and nurture these talent to become early innovators and adopters of technology. And an example I have is a major bank in Asia Pac, when David was actually sharing a little bit more about framework structure, right, in Asia Pac and their adoption for technology. So what they had was actually a really, for the C-suites and everybody else, the team divisions, team division heads that's looking to spearhead some of this innovation or technology or containerization or digitization project, we see this bank create a stand up a proper tech council committee that helps to empower the business users and business units, and it creates spaces and create empowerment for the technology team to collaborate with these business users who probably intrinsically understand where their business is coming from and what's required out of the business. So this starts not just at the application or the Kubernetes layer, it starts right down from the infrastructure and security layer, and help these business users understand how a banking infrastructure is being stood up and how they could actually leverage on what they have, or you know, for all the way to the applications and tools. So it's a collaborative ecosystem is what I'm seeing a lot now from the role of a IT organization.
It reminds me of an anecdote recently with another Southeast Asian bank, probably not the same one, and the program director kept calling me, telling me I was lucky. I was a lucky guy. I was like, I don't understand what you meant. And then finally someone explained that years and years ago, decades ago, when we did the first implementation of one of their banking wealth management platforms, it took 8 years to deploy it. The next time we came along, we managed to get it down to 8 months. And then when we finally got them onto containerized platforms, we managed to deploy new services in 8 minutes. And as we all know, 8's a lucky number in Southeast Asia. And when we got 3 8s, it's triply lucky. So he was like, you're the guy that brings luck. You're like 8 years down to 8 months, down to 8 minutes. And I was like, oh, now I understand why you used to give me funny looks. David Curry, I wonder if I could bring you back in here. I'm interested to talk now about skills, and particularly, you know, when we think about a lot of these big digital transformations and digital disruptions that we're dealing with, particularly digital transformation, as Michael outlined in the early part, one of the big challenges becomes a HR problem. How do we explain to our HR departments who we need to hire, or how do we get them to go through the training and recertification process to ensure that our teams, whether they're operational or support, or even down to our developers and so forth, support teams, are skilled and aware of the technologies, particularly as they move very quickly, and that change moves almost on an hourly basis. I wonder, David, if you could maybe give us a bit of an outline from your point of view, what skills are required in order to run mission critical applications, particularly enterprise applications and containers, and how those skills can be obtained.
Yeah, it's a great question, because most organizations we've worked with have a healthy mix of strategies for ensuring they've got the right skills. Because just relying on smart people to manage the deployment of your container platform to do you know, any sorts of work in that space, it's not enough. You need to actually have a good mix. Usually what we're seeing is skills that are acquired through a combination of different factors. Allowing teams to educate themselves through self-learning is a key one. Most people in the technology sphere like to do some self-learning, so allowing for that is really important. Providing enough resources for experimentation, so you know, a lot of environments are required, you know, being able to spin those up very quickly, which is afforded by the technology, is important, and allowing experimentation. Hiring experienced resources. Typically, some organizations are bringing in other resources from other organizations to bring that knowledge base in. And then another one which is really important is working with other organizations, you know, to bring in that skill. So pairing together and working together. And I'll talk about an example in terms of, this is actually public knowledge. We work with the US Air Force. And so US Air Force has a thing that they do, which is aircraft refueling. And for many years, well, for however long, aircraft refueling was done by the US Air Force in a very sort of rudimentary way. It was a bunch of smart people in a room using whiteboards and maybe post-it notes and working out which aircraft was banked for the refueling tanker. And they started to think differently about, well, maybe we can do something around automating this process. And so they worked with us on bringing resources in to help them think about this problem in a different way, and building a solution which was an automated solution in a digital way, to sort of bring that knowledge into that institution, the US Air Force. And the results are truly transformative in terms of what they've been able to achieve. Instead of, like, you know, banking aircraft and wasting fuel, they've actually managed to save, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars per day in terms of making sure that the right aircraft is ready for refueling at the right time through an automated process. And the people that have been brought along that journey in the US Air Force in terms of the skill set were paired with people from another organization to bring them up to that level. And they've now been able to roll that through the rest of the institution, or start to roll that through the rest of the institution. So an example of, like, we're working together with someone that's got the skill sets can bring you up to that requisite skill set.
Right. Celine, I'd be keen to get your take on this from a very similar perspective. I mean, David, you've outlined some amazing things around the challenge of, I guess, you know, building teams. I haven't seen many larger enterprises who have dedicated teams just sitting around doing nothing but waiting to run programs. You invariably have a program director or a project manager put in place, and they pull in the skills from various parts of the business to do this. Celine, you must be seeing this across the enterprise space now with the adoption of containers and rolling out technologies like Kubernetes, where they have to draw from multiple parts of the business for business skill sets and multiple parts of the business for the technology skill sets they need as well.
Yeah, so I think we are talking about assembling the right team, right? And there's really no right team or perfect team, it really depends on what the organization's makeup and again, what's the definition and meaning, right? And what's the measurement for success. So I've seen some teams run mission critical applications in containers. And let's talk more about companies that are organizing themselves to become more efficient in decision making, both tactically to solve the problem today, as well as from a long-term perspective, and eventually to innovate. So I've seen some IT organizations empower divisions to look into self-service analytics and digitization, running their own cost center, creating a very robust chargeback model, which by the way, I think a container platform actually allows that as well. And not speaking on behalf of David, and David can add on to that, right? I've also seen successful center of excellence teams helping business make informed decisions by taking most of digital analytics work, from using tools, hiring data scientists, experts to extrapolate more AI, ML, deep learning insights specific to areas where they are looking for. And you know, when you look at these things, it's all gearing towards empowering business to drive insights and outcome. With data can go either way, right? But we mustn't take our sight away from defining the role of the IT division that is constantly evolving today, and in my last 20 years in the industry, challenged lately with the pandemic. So to kind of take things a little step further, the sheer number of open source platforms, and you know, whether it's R, Python, TensorFlow, Kubernetes, GitHub, Java, PGP, to on-prem applications and cloud applications to achieve objectives that, you know, we've just mentioned. I'm sure David's example will include way more than Kubernetes and way more than containerization to make that miracle happen, to make the magic happen. And it will now really require the right talent, but also applying the right tools in the right place, in the right areas, and best practice framework becomes a digital blueprint and an organization's guiding principle and approach. So going back to containerization, it will allow a level of flexibility towards managing a large number of open source tools, right, and cloud native applications or on-prem applications, allowing you to put the talent you hire, you know, at doing what they do best, which is coding, which is developing, and letting technology assist with the management and the orchestration and the operations management with rules and guidelines defined by you and your team.
There's some great points there, and I think there's that interesting balance now that we're being challenged with, where you know, open source has definitely shown us a number of new ways and new design patterns and new principles for development to implement DevOps and automation orchestration by the adoption of microservices and containerization and clustering technologies like Kubernetes on virtualization or cloud platforms. One of the biggest challenges I see around this is this question of, you know, who gets trained, when do they get trained, what sort of training do they get, whether it's engineering, infrastructure, the operations team, support teams, security teams. David, I wonder if you could maybe give us your take on that and what you're seeing out there now, where the most effective approaches you've seen are generating gains for the enterprise.
Yeah, I don't think you can sort of just say one team from another team. I think you need a healthy mix of engineering, infrastructure, operations, security. There's certainly security. You can't get away from security. You need them involved, right? But one of the characteristics that you need to have is that there's no fear in coding, because automation is such a big thing in this space. You need to be able to have people that are not afraid to put their hands on the keyboard and write code to automate. They have to have that tendency for automation. The most successful teams that we come across and that we're involved with working with have really high, another key characteristic is high levels of empathy and engagement with stakeholders. You know, going back to that, you know, earlier commentary before, takes a, you know, a village. The village means that you need to be able to communicate with the rest of the villages. So it's really important, right? You need to be able to engage with those stakeholders, realize what they need, and what you're providing is a service to those people, and working with them. So understanding their objectives, understanding the organizational objectives, tying the two together and being able to deliver something which meets those in the best possible way, in the most efficient way. And I guess the security aspect is a key one, but you know, the successful organizations, when they're adopting these technologies, really have clear governance and security practices. So you can't exclude security. You need to make sure they're trained, and you need to get them involved very early in the piece so that they are educated on the platform and the technology so that they can implement security as early as possible in the cycle, in the approach that they're using to deploy. So you don't want to run it in isolation, and you want to be able to like work together, and all of those parties have to work together.
Celine, I'd love to get your take on this from the perspective of skill sets and leadership and communication, because I think, you know, what David's just outlined there very well is that it's all well and good to think about maybe reskilling, retraining, and re-educating some of our teams, but they also bring their own skill sets but we have that knowledge inside the organizations in various forms and parts of the businesses that we have running consistently, and the challenge to, I guess, be able to stretch and scale and be agile. What are you seeing out there, and where do you see something the real wins around this whole challenge of making sure you've got the right skills and training and education?
So I have really strong feelings about what David just said about security, because I was actually involved in an opportunity that actually had that situation come up, right? Kerberos issues and how different applications are talking to the security level. So I do agree that it's so important to involve the right stakeholders early on. And I've heard various senior leaders, to your point, as telling me that besides creating customer elasticity and centricity as their top mandate, they sense that the smartest technologists in the room, the best data scientists in the room, best app developer in the room may not be able to truly and fully understand their business problems. They're really great at coding. They write beautiful codes, and they're able to go deploy them and get them done in a matter of days and minutes, right? So he actually told me this, like, we can hire the smartest people in the room who are great technically at their jobs, but I can't stress enough how important it is for a technologist to empathize and understand with the stakeholders. And he's talking about both internal and external. And also it's a little bit more of a job creation and job, redefining the job scope. Because a lot of times someone sitting in Singapore versus someone sitting in Australia and India trying to string together this whole project of transformation and innovation may not really get what they're doing. They're just being passed on a scope, and then they're being asked to code, and then they pass it on to another team, and then there's what am I exactly doing? It gets lost. So I think it's really important to be able to understand what exactly are they trying to achieve as a team together, and this requires a lot of very intrinsic understanding of their job scope and empathizing with what's going on out there.
Indeed, I'm seeing a lot of conversations come back to program delivery 101, communication, scope, planning, roadmaps. David, I wonder if I could ask you, and I apologize, probably a slightly loaded question, so probably a good thing I'm not there. You might throw a stapler at my head, but in essence, I'm hearing quite often there's no compression cycle for maturity. When we think about this from adoption timelines and roadmaps, they typically take a long time. I wonder if you could maybe give us your take on this whole challenge around the fact that I think we're seeing there's no compression cycle for this maturity curve, and how long adoption takes typically in your mind.
Yeah, I mean, it depends, I guess, on the level of engagement that the resources have with the stakeholders they're dealing with within the organization. Typically, we see success with the adoption when the platform owners and teams treat the platform like a product. And treating it like a product means really sort of high levels of customer or stakeholder engagement, fast feedback, evangelism, support. Those aspects are really key in treating it that way. It's not something that just sits in the corner and you just leave it. You have to continually sort of evolve it. So that's sort of a key thing. And we thought, well, with all that said, adoption can take time, but those that are successful usually are taking an iterative approach. They're not trying to build everything all at once, because sometimes that can be the thing that slows down the adoption, and it can be doomed to failure in many respects. My iteration is really important. It's possible mainly because of the fact that you've got automation. Because of the automation that exists these days, you can automate fairly quickly and iterate very quickly, getting fast feedback, being able to iterate. The use of pipelines in terms of automated fashions to get changes into your platform. So having skilled engineers that are not afraid to code and automate helps with that whole process of being able to get those things in.
Celine, I imagine that something that comes to mind here is design thinking. It's something that often gets thrown on a whiteboard and people scratch their heads what it actually means. But when we think about trying to compress this life cycle of implementation, the cycle of maturity, and the adoption of some of these new technologies like containerized platforms and Kubernetes and so forth, what's your take on this?
So yeah, I've seen a lot of customers scratch their heads and think about what exactly are their key priorities. An example is a customer of HPE GM Financials, right? And they're looking to increase the number of car loans and customers, right? Basically, they want customers to buy more cars so they can do more loans with these customers. But processing loans, customer satisfactions, these are all really, really important for them. So they were very good at early on setting that stage right and saying that these are my top 2 criteria. I want you to do analytics on the audio customer cost center that's coming in, the calls that's coming in. I want you to be able to do analytics on that. I want you to be able to, I want your technology and my technology to integrate in such a form that it's able to provide me with high compute power, great performance on the level of data that's coming through, right? So they set these criteria really early on. And when we talk about design thinking and we talk about going up on the whiteboard, I've seen so many organizations say, I want to solve 25 problems, but they're not going to be done overnight. So it's an idea of creating a grid and asking yourself, what's your most complex and hardest to solve problem? Does it give you the highest ROI? Usually it does, but it probably materialize in a few years' time. And then there are those that are, right in front of you, couldn't, wouldn't take a year to get that done, and be able to tackle these challenges really quickly, whether it's with technology, with what David mentioned, hiring the right people. So I think when it comes to design thinking, which I'm kind of a part of with INSEAD, right, and taking that course, it is not something that you could create in a blueprint and kind of get that deployed immediately. It is about really understanding what are your key challenges and prioritizing them, and understanding highest returns versus complexity, and what solutions available on the table.
I love it. Now, I'm mindful of the time, so I'm going to invite both of you to switch into a speed dating mode for our next topic, agility, which I think is probably appropriate. When we think about agility and I guess the whole challenge of, what needs to change to enable the ability to quickly react to anticipated incidents, which this year, 2020, the year we want to forget, has certainly given us cause to desire, and the changes to take advantage of market opportunities. David, when we think about development, how do containers make software engineering more agile?
Yeah, I think the speed dating format, the biggest thing that containers allows developers to do is that they can focus very much on writing code, not worrying about the concerns of environment constructs, networking, routing, all of those sorts of things. So very much focused on code, very much focused on deploying their application out to market, out to their consumers, right? So the other thing that you get with containers is the ability to self-service, which is pretty important. So, allowing that is, ultimately what the developers are trying to do is get their application from development to production as quickly as possible. And we're providing that through containerization, which is the key thing, right? So removing all of those roadblocks, get them out to production quickly.
David, when you're dealing with significantly large number of containers, what needs to change in the area of automation and IT service management, or ITSM, for teams to be able to achieve that level of reliability they need in an enterprise, whilst they're still being agile and nimble and being able to deploy quickly and rapidly? And particularly how containers help companies innovate in that space.
Yeah, I guess to answer that, the best way is having a platform is the key here, in terms of allowing those teams to be able to manage that in a sort of truly operationally efficient way. So, allowing that self-service means, providing ways in which teams can actually leverage that platform in a truly self-service way. They can actually spin up environments with governance and controls in place. So having a platform which embeds a lot of the thinking around making it self-service, making it operational, allowing for scale, allowing teams to scale if they need, and automate as much of that as possible. All of those things are part of a platform. It's part of the thing that a lot of vendors, ourselves included, are providing to customers, yourselves included. So that's part of the whole. That's part of this.
Celine, a big part of this is cloud migrations. I wonder if you could give us your take on what's happening in that space with regard to this whole world of digital transformation.
Yeah, I believe agility breeds innovation, but with innovation requires execution. So if again, agree agree with what David has to say. And if you want to create agility, it's you know, being able to really figure out your strategy and what you're going to do really quickly, and be able to see through and follow through to it. So I think it's extremely important. There's no point having grand plans but not being able to execute them. And we believe that containerization technology actually allows for the execution to happen really quickly, and therefore innovation really quickly.
Genius, I love it. Now, at the risk of putting you on the spot again, Celine, just one more point I'd like to put to you before we move to our Q&A section. You mentioned before something that really strikes a chord with me on a constant level of everything, no one size fits all. I wonder if you could just reiterate on that and give us some insight into what you're seeing around the space and how that plays out, so that you can convey to your integrators and partners as well as customers what it actually means when you say no one size fits all in this space.
Yeah, I definitely do not believe that, you know, one single technology vendor or one single technology is going to solve world's hunger, right? I think that you could be using virtual machines from VMware, you could be using hardware server storage from HPE, you could be using multiple different types of technology to fit into what you want to achieve from your business objectives. And an example would be, I'm just going to give maybe two very distinct examples and why. So an oil field services company with a large number of IoT devices and oil rigs, you know, and edge solutions may need to adopt a completely different digital strategy and containerization blueprint to that of a brick and mortar traditional retailer looking to create a more sophisticated e-commerce platform. And while we're here to all help you every step of the way, it is still extremely important to understand once again the business and what it means to the important stakeholders, your customers, your team's role, and what are your values, in, you know, and set up the blueprint that is befitting and take steps to start creating meaningful changes. I've seen measurements of success in terms of millions of dollars of savings in infrastructure, positive job redefinition, resulting in a happier, motivated workforce, in especially important times like that, and accelerated market share as a result of a tight digital blueprint. So I can't emphasize how important it is, but again, it is up to the audience here to discover, speak with us, talk to us, and be able to figure out, you know, what fits for them.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for that amazing conversation. It's been absolutely fascinating to get your insights, both from the business perspective and the technology perspective. We've got about 5 minutes left to go, so I'd like us to pivot now into the question and answers portion before we wrap up. Some great questions that have come in from our attendees, and thank you everyone for taking time to post those into the chat window. David, I wonder if I could start with you. One of the questions that's come in is the whole topic of dev versus ops. One of my favorite. I wish I had a t-shirt for every time I'd seen this. The question from the audience is, does the ops team need the same level of proficiency and maturity as the engineering team? David, I wonder if you could have a crack at that one.
Yeah, so I guess the way I'd answer this question is to say, look, operations when running, you know, something like Kubernetes needs to have an engineering mindset. Are they the same level of proficiency? Maybe not, but they do have to have an engineering mindset. So the solutions that exist, it's with the things that have been released recently, it's important not to lose sight of the mindset, because there's so many aspects of the orchestration platform, the container orchestration platform, that you need to think about. And I mentioned them earlier. Automation provides for integrations, maintenance of base container images, patching and upgrading, all of these things. If you're using automated pipelines to do these, you need to have an engineering mindset. So difficult to say it's exactly the same as a developer's mindset, but you do have to have an engineering mindset in terms of the way that you go about, you know, sort of managing these platforms.
Celine, there's a question I'd like to put to you. You've already touched on this in a number of ways, so I'd love to get you to summarize this. The question from the audience today that I'd like to put to you is stakeholder alignment. Who in the organization is impacted by deploying Kubernetes?
I think everybody is impacted, but in a really positive way. I don't think there's any job replacement that technology is trying to do here, but again, I believe it is job redefinition. And by being more agile, it is having the ability to innovate, and having a good operational efficiency increases the resiliency of an organization, regardless of what times you're in.
A great answer. David, one for you, I think. Generally, and I'm going to paraphrase it because it's quite a long question, and thank you for posting it in the chat window. Understanding new architectures, the whole challenge of requirements for running microservices in production at scale. how does Kubernetes make it easy to run microservices in this environment, and how could you compare the architectures of applications running in Kubernetes to traditional monolithic enterprise applications?
That is a really long question, and probably not enough time to answer it in the space of a minute. But I guess
summarize it if you can.
I'll try. I'll see if I can. I suppose the best way, the first thing you should do is sort of understand microservices and what they are, which is effectively small autonomous services that work together, which are usually, small in size, message enabled, bounded by context, autonomously deployed, independently deployable, decentralized, a bunch of aspects to them. And so when you look at Kubernetes and what it provides, it makes running microservices easier. And the reason for that is because you can do things like, enable the multi-cloud operations, you can deliver more services independently, you can reduce the manual tasks that it might be, involved with that. There's a whole bunch of things that it allows for. So, and if you look at what a monolithic application looks like versus a microservice or microservices application, instead of deploying a whole application, you're just deploying those independent little units. And because you've got this platform that allows you to do that, it makes it a lot faster. It allows you to iterate quickly. You can do things without bringing down a whole system. So they are kind of the key advantages that you get from it, and the architectures allow for.
Fantastic. Now we are coming up on the hour. There's one last question which I might take myself, because this is one I'm extremely passionate about, and I constantly bring to the forefront of boards to ensure it's on their agenda as a standard agenda item every month. And the question was around upskilling staff, the HR challenge. One of the questions from the attendees today is, what level of knowledge, experience, training, and certification / qualifications required to run and operate Kubernetes? So we could write a whole book about that. I think what I would like to do is just paraphrase that, say that the challenge is actually upskilling staff. And the point you made around it being a HR challenge is extremely apt and appropriate. I would recommend that all organizations, when they look at any new technology, particularly containerization and Kubernetes, start with their HR and look at the types of resources they already have and what training and certification skills they have, whether it's operational, whether it's support, whether it's development, whether it's DR, production, etc. And start to map those skills out and look for gaps, and then immediately look for how they're going to fill those gaps. So just essentially bring the HR department in as early as you can when you look at these new technologies, and don't just assume that people are automatically going to just pluck these skills out of the air. It's a very hot topic these days because people are having to, they're challenged with so many other skill sets that they may or may not have had experience with. And my advice is bring your HR team in as early as possible into these programs of work to try and map out the skills and resourcing requirements. We are at the top of the hour. I would like to firstly just pass out a huge heartfelt thank you to David Brown and the team who made this event possible. Thank you everybody who was able to take time in their day, out of their day, and attend. If you are joining us from a replay, thank you very much. We appreciate that. And please do reach out to the rest of your team in your organizations and associates and share this with them. And we would like to get your feedback and input through communication on social media, whether it's LinkedIn groups or Twitter, etc. Thank you to our amazing panelists, Celine and Dave in particular. Michael, great introduction, mini keynote, really set the tone of the conversation well. For more information, there's if you visit the HPE or HPE Asia Pacific social conversation either on LinkedIn or on Twitter, make sure you're following them. Visit their website. There's a hell of a lot of great information there, and engage in the conversation on the various social platforms, particularly LinkedIn. I know the team are very keen to have you reach out to them and tag them, ask them questions, and pose the questions that you might have in your organizations to them, and reach out to your partners and integrators and resellers to see if you can get that conversation going. I think the thing that I'd like to summarize all this with is that one of the most important decisions I'm seeing organizations face with right now is selecting a partner of choice. I think if anything, we've learned today that HP Enterprise, Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and their partners that have joined us today have more than clearly demonstrated they are the go-to team to have a conversation with, and the partner of choice to plan and strategize going forward with as you look to adopt the likes of Kubernetes and Docker and containerized platforms. Again, please share this with your colleagues. Make sure they tune in and have a conversation with it. Reach out to each of the team on social media if you can, and follow them, engage with them online, and if in doubt, pose your hard questions there. With that, have a great afternoon, evening, morning, whatever it might be you join us, and we really appreciate your time, and we'll see you in the next event. I'm Des Blanchfield. Thanks to everyone that joined us today, and thanks to our panelists and hosts and David Brown. Thank you.
Thank you, Des.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.